So thank you for making time. And as Gabe said, as people join, feel free. Let's welcome them. And also, as since we are recording it, we can also share this with others. So today, I'm gonna share some of the snippets of what ILEF's education is like by sharing some of my own expertise. So I have been dean at ILEF since 2017, and before that, I was a professor of theology at a theological school in Berkeley, California, for 15 years. And I moved to from Berkeley to Denver, and everyone in my friends in the Bay Area said, "I'm crazy. Why are you moving out of the San Francisco Bay Area when everyone else wants to move there?" Well, when you feel like your mission at work, especially as a minister and a theologian, is accomplished, then it starts becoming a job rather than vocation, because you know that you stayed and then you did your work there. And so I have been looking for a place where my renewed vocational call will be honored and also matched. And so as a woman theologian, feminist theologian, especially also a woman of color, um, I needed to be in a place where all of who I am and what I am are not separated, but together and honored, and I could drive, and also I could agree, not only agree, but also really advocate the mission of the school, because it matches with mine, my deep calling, and it resonates with me. So, so having said that, some of my interest, uh, I am interested in multiple different things, and you already heard me saying I'm a feminist theologian, but also in academy, I'm known for my work in post-colonial theology. It's a very big language. So post-colonial can mean several different things, but in academy, also in theological education, post-colonial as a one word is different from post-colonial. So when we put dash between post and colonial, we emphasize, chronological time that many countries in Africa, South America, and Asia have been colonized by Western European powers and United States. And so in most countries in Africa in 60s and 70s, they became independent countries. So when we talk about this chronological time difference, we put a dash between post and colonial. But when we use the word post-colonial as one word, is that that's a genre of a study on worldviews that seeing that yes, colonialism with the political independence ended, but what colonialism did to people, to its culture, it's still there. So to undo that, we need to go back to the very moment of where colonizers came and colonized the people, met, and how our worldviews and our thinking, even our food and our clothes and everything about who we are and where we are and our context have been changed. So to undo some of those colonial legacy, we need to go back to that first moment, and then not only do that, but also how, because in Western history, this colonial legacy was very much married to Christianity, Western European Christianity. So, you heard about the crusade, and so this church leaders and political leaders marched to what Middle East now, the Orient, and conquered, and in the name of God, but they really with the Bible and with a sword, and they killed the people, and they didn't think it's a problem, because they thought that they're cruciated for God, and so they need to kill heathens unless they're converted. So that type of and then when African people were brought to this country as a slave people, they were first to convert, right? So hi, welcome. Welcome, Maria Ave, Maria Ave Sierra. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I'm late. I was in a
It's a,
client meeting and I just couldn't get her to stop talking.
so,
I was trying to be respectful. So thank you. Continue, please.
yeah. So, so Western Christianity, when they went to different parts of the world, it was very brutal. It was very brutal, killing and taking over land, and all that were justified in the name of God, who will save them in the name of Christianity. And but now, when we look at what has been done to other people by Western Christianity, that we now realize that their interpretation of the Bible and God's will was very much like their worldview, which often is not the same as what Bible actually says. And this is so like one of the ways that through the post-colonial lens, then how do we do justice to this injustice done to many cultures and people? So then not only we need to look at the political and sociological or economical side of how colonialism did, but how Christianity has been accompanying that colonial imperialism from the beginning. So as we look at them, even the Bible itself, very much written in very Near Eastern ancient imperial context. If you look at read the Hebrew Bible, they were always surrounded by superpower around Israel. And I don't know how many of you have been in Israel. And so I have a family members, and as a Korean woman, my late husband was also a Methodist pastor, and whose family also has a Jewish roots. So I have some family members in Israel. So when I say that I have a family members in Israel as a Korean woman, everyone says, because we have a very typical box, the understanding about who counts for Jews or not, right? So when I go to Israel, from northern Israel to southern part, like a Dead Sea, you can do everything in 3 hours. It's a very tiny country. And so it's very tiny country. And then if you look at, remember world history, Babylonia, Assyria, Persia, Greek, and Rome, they just conquered Israel for thousands of years, one empire and another empire, and especially during Jesus' time, Palestine, current Israel, was occupied the territory of the Roman Empire. So the Rome forced the people to do certain things. The people had to pay tax to Rome, and we see, Roman centurion stories and pirate and in Bible. So these are all Roman occupiers. So when we try to understand even Jesus' message, if we don't count what Roman Empire did to people and why Jesus said certain things in their context, we are really missing 90% of a message, because they were occupied people. And when we read and sing African American spirituals, there is a lot of code languages embedded in those songs. Song is not just the way we think it is, but a lot of embedded code, because they couldn't talk about their freedom in front of their slave masters. So even African American spirituals, there are a lot of code languages embedded to talking about their freedom. And so even in Jesus' message, because of this Roman Empire and the spies everywhere, and that if you are invited to a banquet, don't sit at the front side of the head side of the table, but go at the end of the table and then move up. If we are invited, move up, move up. That's very Roman Empire imperial banquet style. And so whenever the dignitaries in the city hosted a huge banquet, there was people were forced to sit so that their dignitaries look good. So I am adored by all my people subjects here. So the table lengths will be very long, and head of the table, powerful rich people, and then the poor people who are forced to be there at the end of the table without having much food. And often in Roman Empire documents, it say that food served to them were less than even the dog pet food. So, but they were forced to sit there, and then spies were sitting in between. They are listening to people, what kind of conversations, and if they're criticizing the emperor, they were taken away from the table, and sometimes they were tortured, they were killed there. That's the culture. So in that context that Jesus talks about, when you are invited to sit at a banquet, don't sit at the head of the table and then start from there. And then when another parable says, the king's son is getting married, but he couldn't have people come because people knew that those banquets were very terrifying places. They didn't want to be there. And so when they didn't show up, he sent the military and set fire at their house and killed those people. And then saying that this is like a God, and thinking, what? God is that brutal emperor? But because Jesus was a lot of code language in the colonial context, that we just couldn't read the way it is. But so through post-colonial lens, what is a colonial legacy here and hidden code there, and why Jesus said any of those things? So so at ILF, so we try to unearth a lot of those hidden messages to bring justice out, because we just cannot talk about God's justice, God's love for everyone, regardless of who you are, without unearthing those hidden messages. Also, Christian legacy of being married to Western imperialism that conquered so many parts of the world in the name of God. So those are the things that some of the approaches that we take here. So, please interrupt me anytime, any moment if you have questions. So to talk about some of the modern day issues, I'm going to share my screen, which, I really do not like sharing screen because I don't get to see you. But let me share my screen and see. So here I'm sharing some pictures from you. Can you guess what these are and where it's taken? It's
South America?
It's South America, yes. So, Constance, were you going to say something?
No, that I was going to say, I'm in Mexico. That's what I thought.
So these are pictures I took in Colombia in 2015. So in 2015, I took a group of students to Colombia because it's a part of an immersive learning class, but at that time, we were partnered with reconciliation of a peace presence in Colombia. So anyway, so in Colombia, the left side, the water is that the water sold to people by Coca-Cola in just literally the plastic bag. And then the upper picture is a Chiquita bananas that has a huge plantation in Chiquita bananas. And then next to banana workers is one of the paramilitaries hired by a lot of these transnational companies. And then the bottom picture is open pit mining owned by a Drummond mining company, coal company in Alabama. So these are all US-based multinational companies making fortunes in Colombia. So in Colombia, as you can see, the people have a dark skin, and in Colombia, we met a lot of Afro-Colombian people who were brought there even earlier than African enslaved people in this country as slaves to Colombia by Spanish Empire at the time. And so these were the, enslaved people. And then as in this country that the official slavery was over. So these were mostly people who were farmers doing farming or small farming and fishing in their own village where they were slaves. And then they remained for 200 years or 300 years. And suddenly, in 20th century, these big companies started coming to Colombia and with a paper in their hands called the land title. So since they have been living in this land for hundreds of years, they didn't have a concept of a land title because it was their farm, their house, and the river where they would have a drinking water and fishing. But these companies showed up at their doorstep with a land title. And then these people, of course, refused to move out. Where do they go? And then these companies started hiring paramilitaries. And so the water, the Coca-Cola water picture, that was on a desert where displaced Afro-Colombian people living. Some of them were displaced 4 different times. We also have met a young mother, grandmother who was only in her 40s, but her husband died, and she was raising her grandchild because her daughter lost her mind because her daughter witnessed her husband who refused to be displaced or killed by paramilitaries in her presence. And then so then she lost her mind. And so this young grandmother was raising her grandchildren. And so these were displaced people, and so nowhere to go and no money to afford. They started building tents on desert. And when we were there, it's like 8 a.m. in the morning, it was already 110 degrees in 8 a.m. in the morning. So since they were in desert, no access to water, and then the Coca-Cola blocked their pathway to a river where they used to have drinking water, and then instead of selling drinking water in that plastic bag, larger bag for cooking and this smaller bag for drinking. And then the similar thing was done by Chiquita Bananas. Actually, Chiquita Bananas in Colombia in 1920s and 30s. There is also a massacre of people by Chiquita Banana Company that hired the paramilitaries. And then the bottom in Drummond, open pit mining, again, people lost their land. And that area is very famous for mangoes. And so these Afro-Colombian farmers or mango farmers, and they lost the land to raise mango and also access to water. And I have never met those many people in one village, having most children being born deformed. And they just couldn't even afford to see a doctor, and they didn't know why their children were being born like that. And we even talked with Doctors Without Borders who happened to stay in the same hostel that we are staying. And Doctors Without Borders say that they know the situation, but they wouldn't go there because they were threatened by Drummond Mining Company that they were sued. So these are the situations that is happening. And so if you take a plane from Houston or Texas or Denver to Colombia, it takes only a 4 hours flight. And then when you get there, that these situations are happening by companies that is based in US, that we drink Dasani water, bottled water, we drink Coca-Cola products, and including me, I eat bananas often for breakfast. Mostly it's Chiquita Bananas. Also in Colombia, there are a lot of, Del Monte is also there. And then many of us probably live in a house, in a building heated by Drummond coal, the energy. So my point here is that, so not only this colonialism was going on in other parts of the country, but also with the independence of other countries that many of us think is ended, but still, after political independence, now it is economic and cultural colonialism going on all over the world by multinational companies from Western countries like Coca-Cola. So what I describe how this world under it is hidden or visible colonial agenda is what this looks like. So there is a very powerful power at the center of our world. Then there are so many marginalized countries and communities, even in U.S. context, that even a center usually white cisgender male power that has money and access to power and political power, all that. And then there are so many marginalized communities, minoritized communities around that center. But so the power at the center has been so careful and so clever in a way that they keep these marginalized communities at a distance. And then often tactic is used is divide and conquer. So that's what Roman Empire did, that the dividing people and then make people compete with one another to be the privileged partner of the center. And so a similar thing is happening that all these differently marginalized communities around center not interacting with one another much, but always either reacting to the central power or competing with one another with other marginalized communities. So there is a term called, oppression Olympics, so which communities are more oppressed. And rather than we being in solidarity and to fight against it, but often we are so focused on our own community's justice against the center or a better relationship with the center so that our rights are recognized, but this solidarity movement among marginalized communities are not often happening, although now we see some different pictures. So I created this chart to show that how colonialism, all the days, ancient times, and modern days are happening. That center and margin at all in the distance. And then so this model that I put a very well-intended liberal communities that we make a circle big. Make a circle big. That's one of the hymns that often we sing at church. That make your circle bigger, and so that we invite people that we want to be hospitable. But the problem here is that certain marginalized groups are now part of our inclusive community of that the center are now trying to be inclusive, but other marginalized groups are pushed further away or they don't want to be part of this. And so that this what I call well-intended liberal model of a modern day colonial legacy or imperial legacy, that center circle got bigger, but the issue is that there is still center rather than the center needs to be decentered, so this is what I hope that we will go, and this is what I call God's calling for us, for our world, and how those of us called to be social change agents or even ministers and pastors who do justice work, that this is a word that God is calling us to create, and this is my way of a visualization of my calling. So then you were gonna think, so how this is working in theological school. So the previous image here, he's Dr. Craig Stephen Wilder is a professor at Princeton University. So maybe 15 years ago, I think this book came out in 2008. He published this book called Ebony and Ivy, and subtitle is Race, Slavery, and the Troubled History of America's Universities. So in it, what he is unearthing as a historian is that how American higher education has been the main tool of a colonial legacy and also racism. Because in it, he looks at Harvard, Princeton, Brown, and all these Ivy League schools, and also some of the oldest schools like William and Mary and Georgetown University, which is the oldest Catholic university in the country, to which I gave a lot of money because my husband had 2 degrees from that school. So in it, what he says is that America's first higher education institutions, now these prestigious schools, were founded by money donated by slave owners to educate their children and their pastors. So think about then philosophy of education. No school would say we are for slavery. But at that time, it was just a given. That's the way it was. So in that context, these universities were founded to educate slave owners and their children and their pastors. And when I say pastors, because of the Harvard University, Yale University, the first schools out of Harvard and founded was like a divinity school. It started as a divinity school and became a college and university. So Dr. Wilder here is that because the founding ideology and context itself was to support the slavery with the money donated by people who made the money through Atlantic slave trade and also through plantations. America's higher education itself is so embedded in this colonialism, slavery, and racism. Then even after 200 years, 300 years later, those, because most universities try or so busy trying to hide this travel history rather than undoing the history. And then because they produced so many countless leaders of this country that has been leading this country for the last several hundred years, that legacy, colonial legacy, and the racist legacy still continue in hidden ways, even with well-intended people. So then the question is, if theological school has been part of that legacy, how combining that what I said earlier, that the Bible itself was written in such an ancient imperial context, and then modern day colonialism still goes on, and then Christian history, Western Christian history from out of Europe is so married to this colonial legacy, because the priest went to to conquest together with political leaders. So since in Western Christian history and also higher education history of the United States is so embedded in this colonial legacy, imperial legacy, that what theological school or higher education needs to do is owning this history and unearthing this history, and then also doing education in such a opposite way, in some sense, to what has been done to justify all these injustices in the name of God. So here I share one of the my heroes' work, Dr. Musa Dube, who is a professor of New Testament in Botswana. So she published this book called The Post-Colonial Feminist Interpretation of the Bible, in which in the book she is guiding several, providing about 7 principles how to unearth colonial legacies, even embedded in code languages in the Bible itself. So when you take New Testament courses at ILF, you will learn all these details, and so I will not go into in detail. But in this book, she advocates this principle of a reading that she calls it liberating interdependence. So remember, she's from Botswana, whose country became independent only in 1967. So she said in Africa, and including her own country, Botswana, after the independence, the political independence from European country, everyone talked about only independence, and no one wanted to do anything with their former colonizers. And then soon after, they realized that in reality, without doing any work, anything with their former colonizers, they just couldn't even feed their own people as an isolated, independent country. So, so here she defines interdependence as to describe and underline interconnectedness of a different histories and economic structures and political structures, as well as the relatedness of a cultural text and race, class, and gender within specific global context. So she said, independence cannot sustain us. We need to be in interdependent relationships. But that interdependence needs to be liberating interdependence, where no one group is dominating, but everyone has equal sharing, equal participations. And so she's advocating this liberating interdependence as a principle for theology and reorganizing our own world itself and our even personal relationships, and also even country relationship, but also as a reading principle of the Bible, that whether the way that we read the Bible, the way we interpret God's message through theology is generating liberating interdependence, not at the cost of somebody else's, but does it create this interdependence, justice for all people, not marginalizing any one group. So she's presenting this principle. And so I have not met her, but I communicate with her once in a while through writings, and that do some the writing project together. But so this has been very important principle for myself as a theologian or as a pastor, whether my sermon, my ministry, my teaching is generating, liberating interdependence. And so that's one of the reasons why I came to ILIF, because I thought that this is one of the schools that I can thrive on that principle. And so here, my last slide is another friend of mine, colleague. Her name is we call her Andrea Smith, and she is a scholar of Native American issues at UC Riverside. So you can Google her name and then find this 3 pillars of white supremacy. That very short article, very powerful article, is available free online. So in it, she is really unearthing in modern day United States context how this colonial legacy is still shaping our everyday life. And so here she's providing, presenting her analysis that how white supremacy, which is a very keen form of colonialism and imperialism in modern day context, is at work in even United States. So one of the pillars, she says, is capitalism that is very deeply married to slavery. So she said, to make a capitalism work, there are certain people who need to be sacrificed to make this system work. So within this U.S. context, she says this is very deeply based on anti-Black racism. So the message is that those the African Americans, they were very slaveable people. And then the message is, to other marginalized people is that, aren't you lucky that you are not Black? That it's at the bottom of this racial ladder, our societal ladder. So not to be like Black people, you need to work better. You need to work harder. And so this creating this ladder of a racial hierarchy that at the cost of Black, brown people now, brown people, including that how we sustain capitalism on the back of Black people, and then by promoting and generating constant new form of slavery, anti-Black agenda. So as many of, and probably all of you read that important book by Michelle Alexander about the prison industry book, that in modern day United States, the prison industry is a modern, according to Michelle Alexander, is a modern day form of slavery, because who is in prison in the United States? Mostly African Americans, mostly African American males, and so they provide a very cheap labor even in the prison. So to make this capitalism sustain, that there a certain group of people need to be at the bottom of the ladder, not treated well, not paid well, and then making other people feel good because they are not that group. And so by conquer and divide the principle of the imperial legacy, that she is arguing that one of the critical pillars of modern day colonialism in US, which is white supremacy, is the anti-Black racism that supports capitalism. The next pillar she talks about is a genocide of indigenous people. So why those Native American people need to disappear? Because we are all occupiers of their lands. So if we don't say that they are not here any longer, we become all illegal occupants of someone else's land. So these Native people keep needing, they need to be unseen, they need to disappear, so that we all become legitimate land occupiers. So that Andrea Andy Smith is saying that that first Native American people's genocide, so that the land title is legit, but also this also again supports capitalism, because land ownership is important part of property ownership, is important part of capitalism. And then the third pillar is anti-immigrants and Muslim sentiment, which is what she calls Orientalism and war. So Orientalism is the word coined by the late scholar Edward Said, who was professor at Columbia University. He's a Palestinian. So in academy, Orientalism these days mean that a certain group is inferior. So when British Empire were occupying Middle East, they discovered that there are so many ancient artifacts, but they are saying that since you do not know how precious these items are, but we know, we will take this from you and protect this for you. So that's how museums started. The London's the British Empire Museum. It's mostly displayed with items that they stole from their occupied territories. And the idea was that, you ignorant people do not know how cherishable these are, so we will protect this for you since you are so inferior. That was the original idea of Orientalism. And so, but Andy Smith says that Orientalism is still, very much in the air, that those inferior people are coming to us and they become threats to our stability. And especially those Muslims and those people of color, immigrants that destabilize this land. And so therefore, these are people who are threatening us. We need to be at war with them all the time. Anti-Muslim, anti-immigration policies. So Andy Smith, who is a theology and religion scholar, is presenting this, that modern day colonialism in the United States context have these three pillars: that anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous people, and anti-immigrants and Muslim people, and that supports US's capitalist system, and then discrimination against a group of people, and then constant war that we are engaging within the country and outside of the country, and especially in the Pacific and in Colombia. I didn't know until 2015 that Colombia has 7 United States military bases. 7. I had no idea. And then Colombia is the number 2 country that gets US aid after Afghanistan in the world. So that means that United States is controlling their economy. because without US aid money, Colombian government cannot function, right? So, and then this presence of a Coca-Cola and Drummond and the Chiquita and Del Monte, all that. So my point here is that, you know, we are all good people and very well-intended people, but these are the air that we breathe in, breathe out without realizing. So what we try to do, let me stop sharing my screen. What we try to do at ILIF is that how, and some people, some theology and theological schools never pay attention to these structural issues, but for us at ILIF and our faculty is that without paying to this, you know, dealing with the structural injustices, we just cannot talk about God's love. Because while we are talking about God's love, that hidden, invisible air that we are breathing in, breathing out, is very, very married to this colonial legacy that we are part of. Because as Andy Smith says, the three pillars, no one is off the hook now. It's just so entangled. So then, to disentangle this such a messy system that is constantly discriminating against us people like women, people of color, especially Black people, LGBTQI people, immigrants and Muslims, and whoever is different from the original standard set by white educated male worldview standards. You know, never be equal within the system. Because if someone wants to maintain the system needs to be sustained the way it should be. That's the colonial legacy. So so that's the reason why at ILIF we talk about structural issues, structural injustice issues as a part of ministry work. And but also undoing this work really does a lot to our body and spirit, and therefore spiritual formation is very important at ILIF. And even during our pandemic time, we have a mindfulness prayer group that meets online twice a week. And then those of us who are on ILIF email list, every Sunday we get YouTube spiritual practice from our Dean of Chapel. And then also our student spiritual practice is important. And also to undo some of these huge things that you know, we are taking small steps. So one of the first class that every IF student is taking is called Identity, Power, and Vocation in Community. So it's about 10 students and one instructor for whole year goes along for entire year. In it, we think about deeply what's our assumptions, what are our worldviews that I never explicitly thought about, and how it is connected to a larger system. So how do we deal with the difference? How do we deal with the people different from my own worldviews? And in that context, what is my vocational call as a member of a community? So that's called the Identity, Power, and Vocation in Community. It's very, very formative class, very not easy class to get through, but year and year again, our students say that that's the most powerful experience that changed their worldviews. And so through that orientation, we introduce our students to how you know, how to interpret Bible and how do we analyze history and theology, and then from those knowledges, how do we also create worship space and educational means and pastoral care that considers all these structural issues coming at people and their spirit. So that these are some of the basic approaches we take at ILIF, and what I shared is one particular approach that I, as a dean, take as a both not only as a dean but also as a faculty person here. And I know I spoke so long, so let me stop here and then you know, answer any questions that you may have.
I know you spoke about the class. What is to find out what is my spiritual identity? That would be something that I am interested in. So how would I follow up to find out how to be involved in that? And also the spiritual YouTube spiritual practices is something that I would be interested in.
So that class is a required class for all first-year students.
Okay.
And so if someone starts in winter quarter is a 4 credits and spring quarter is a 2 credit. If students who start in the fall, it is a 2 credit in the fall, 2 credit in winter, and 2 credit in spring. And so, as I said, it's based on cohort model, because we really believe in that we cannot do this work as an individual, but we have to do this as a community. So we try to build, help students build their own cohort and community. So 10 to 12 students with one instructor throughout the year. And so that you also not only being in the class and learn about contents, but we also learn how to build the community together. And Gabe, so maybe, Gabe, you can ask the IT, add her email address to our announcement list.
Okay.
Yeah, to get that YouTube video.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions? You don't have to ask a question about what I said, but any questions that you have at this point will be between admissions representative and dean. I think we should be able to answer your questions.
I can offer a question.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. I've been taking notes, it's really good. You mentioned that at ILIF, it's an institution that allows you to take into consideration these structural issues and these structural injustices. And I just thought, and you mentioned that the class Identity, Power, and Vocation and Community is, as a mandatory course, is one of the ways that you ensure that students get to take those structural issues into account in their lives. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to offer the opportunity for you to mention any other initiatives or, initiatives or projects that ILIF as a school takes on to continue to kind of interrogate its own involvement in structural issues and injustices that you mentioned.
Yes. So all of our classes, explicitly, implicitly, one form or another, is approaching very perspective, very structured perspective, the beyond an individualistic approaches that we do. Gabe, were you to say that,
Yeah, I think in addition to that, another way to kind of interrupt sort of the narratives is really looking at who our students are and making sure, from quarter to quarter that we are truly welcoming to all students, so that we can guarantee that we have a variety of perspectives in the classroom and in the conversations that are happening, faculty, staff, and within our students, and listening to and hearing the conversations that they're bringing from their own communities.
Yeah.
A lot of times, schools require a student to move to the area where the school is, and then your community becomes that much smaller because you've now removed yourself from wherever you're coming from. ILIF has students all over the place, 40-something.
From 43 different states.
43 different states. And so getting those conversations of the communities where people are helps us to continue to break that system and listen to what's happening, not just in the Denver metro area, but what's happening around the nation and around the world.
Yeah, like what's happening in rural Alabama. We have some students serving tiny church in rural Alabama and coming to school. And also we have a very, very well-functioning Office of Professional Formation, which in other schools called like a field education or context-based education, your internship program managing office. So usually in your second year, if you're in MD program, or if you're in MAPSC, Pastoral and Spiritual Care, or Master of Social Justice and Ethics, you have to do certain credit hours of internship. So they work with context that where you are in, that is in alignment with your vocational call. And also another thing is that about 1/3 of our students are not identifying as Christians. So so in our classroom itself, it becomes a lab of how interreligious work and dialogue can happen, because in these days, without knowing anything about other religions, how can you be a spiritual leader? Because the violence done in this country is also so married, it's embedded with a certain interpretation of a Christianity done against the people of a different religion, especially like Muslims and other, right? So we do that, and then in ILIF, we require students to take courses other than Christianity. So we have 2 faculty members who are scholars of Buddhism and Hinduism and East Asian religions. And then every year we have something called the Evading Distinguished Lectureship, that based on our generous donor, that we last 2 years and this coming year, I bring one of the top Muslim scholars of the world. So last year we brought Hamza Yusuf, who is regarded as the most influential Islamic studies scholar born outside of a Muslim world. And so he was our evening lecturer who taught class. And then next year, I bring Dr. Jasmine Jin, who is in Toronto, who is a leading scholar in Islamophobia against the youth. And she identifies herself as a Muslim feminist. So she will teach that class and give public lecture, all that. So we try to offer those opportunities for our students. But also, because we have a very close relationship and joint programs with the University of Denver. The University of Denver's Religious Studies Department has scholars of Islam and other religions. So through cross-registration, you can also take courses from University of Denver through that way. Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Any questions?
Questions, comments, thoughts, something you didn't know?
I guess I was very clear.
This was the first time that I've had an opportunity to take this in as well. And so I think for me, I'm continuing to process and even being born actually in Colombia and learning about the country that I'm from, but don't have a real connection to. I'm sitting here thinking like, gosh, I need to do some learning about where I was born. So yeah, that's it's great information, and I've learned a lot just in this time together.
One of the most powerful moments being in Colombia, one of the several of my students who traveled there with me were African American women. And I had a student who was older than me, who is a classmate of Kamala Harris. They went to law school together. So when we got out of the bus, there was a Afro-Colombian woman waiting for us to greet us as a village representative, the village on desert in tent village. They hugged each other and they were just crying, hugging for 5 minutes. That's that they immediately felt that connection that no one could describe in words, but such deep connections. We don't hardly know anything about Afro-Colombian people, even among African Americans living here, and that was really a powerful moment to witness. Avi, do you have anything to?
No, I'm just so glad that I was still allowed in when I was late, because I just loved hearing you speak. And of course I was like writing down everything I could. That's something I do. And I'm just excited. I'm still wrestling with the decision to apply to ILIF, mostly because of my own lack of confidence in doing that. But I appreciate ILIF creating opportunities like this, because it kind of gives me a glimpse into what this experience could be like for me. I've worked in ministry for the last 16 years, and thankfully in a small ministry where we do social justice work. And just in my own life experience, I'm at the point where I want to expand my knowledge and experience, and finally starting to define what I see my work is to do in this next phase of my life. And ILIF was never on my radar before, and these are amazing opportunities. So thank you for sharing this and creating this opportunity.
Where are you located?
I'm in Denver.
Oh, you're in Denver. Okay. So we have Rachel from Texas, and Constance, Aurora, and Ave, you're in Denver, and Gabe in Aurora. I'm in Korea right now. In a government designated quarantine place, not being able to be outside of this one room. This is day 10. I have to be here for 14 days. So I haven't seen my parents yet.
I was on quarantine for the first half of November, so I feel your pain.
Well, I would just like to say I have had the opportunity to visit ILIF on 2 separate occasions and was very impressed. And I do feel a calling to the social change, to be a social change agent. So I'm still, new at this, and I keep getting attracted to that direction, to ILIF. I finished my master's at Daniels College of Business, and I got my undergrad at DU also. So I just practically lived on the campus, but I was always attracted to ILIF. And I'm like, what is this about ILIF? So I do know a lot about it, and I'm just going to continue to pursue it. I feel very good about it. This next half of my life being called to, pursue social justice. I just, how you have that feeling. So I'm not going to dismiss it. I'll keep at it. And thank you very much. This was very informative, very interesting. I'm huge on research, so I'm going to check into a lot of the books that you've given us and just keep going from there.
Certainly. Well, thank you all again. And because this was recorded, I can certainly send it to you so you can continue to process. If there's something that you missed, you can rewatch and look for those pieces.